The Potomac at MountVernon, originally written in 2016 by Isznen Feddors. Dedication. Dedicated to Sister Mary Concilio, Sister Mary Grace, and Sister Mary DeSales, all quadroons, all deceased, and nuns of the Catholic Order, the Oblate Sisters of Providence. Thank you for being great teachers in my life, both scholastically and in life's experiences. Introduction. I, Isznen Feddors, not only am an American of diverse blood, European, Spanish, Arab, Jewish, I am one of America's most primary and quintessential authors, and astoundingly a versatile one. I was highly enthralled by that of the finest in classical music, Tchaikovsky, Handel, Chopin, Bach, Schubert, Artemeyev, Albioni, and etc. As I wrote out the divinely inspired memoir of Lil, the main character of this riveting novella, it is with exhilarating joy that I share this confounding story with my readers. As you read this story, memoir, I query of you to place oneself in the character's position and attempt to respond as he, during this period of time in which he lived. Finally, I wish to give acknowledgement to the natives of this land, the Indian Americans, have denote them, and their title as Native Americans. Amongst the Indians, they are and shall always be considered as the only natives to this land. They are, and ever shall be, the original settlers and owners. If it was but for not the Indians assisting the Pilgrims and the settlers with Captain John Smith, these foreign new settlers would have all died. Prologue. In 1565, the Spanish were the first to arrive in this land we call North America, by way of Florida, during the Golden Age of Spain. In 1497, Amerigo Vespucci, an Italian navigator, landed in Central America and realized it was the New World, and not India. As Columbus had prescribed, in 1492, however, Christopher Columbus, on a mission for the Spanish crown, King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella, and backed by Vatican's papacy, Pope Innocente VIII, to begin expediting the Spanish Inquisition, he was in the search of India, the spice capital of the world. To no avail, the Bahamas and Hispaniola were the first countries he had landed upon. Soon thereafter followed the countries throughout the Caribbean, Central America, and South America, and Florida, now blended in as well, thus yielding their reign of tyranny upon the indigenous people of the land. The Jews and Arabs, also Moors, that were forced out of Spain due to this Inquisition, were now thrusted upon the shore of Hispaniola. During this time, 1565, Charles, heir to the Spanish Habsburg crown, inherits Castilian Empire in America, securing their crown for himself and his heirs. Nearly 2.5 centuries later enters Emperor Napoleon of France to decimate the Spanish tyranny. In December 1606, King James I of England grants a charter to be carried out by the way of an organization titled the Virginia Company of London. The purpose of this charter is to establish a colony for the king in the New World, America. The Virginia Company of London then deemed and delineated Captain John Smith to navigate 3 ships across the Atlantic Ocean along with 100+ settlers to establish this colony. In May 1607, they arrived in and established this new colony, Jamestown, Virginia. the perceived first settlement in North America, named for its king, and for the London Company that sponsored this expedition. Interestingly enough, Captain John Smith, much earlier in the late 1590s, was a captive prisoner, made into a slave in Constantinople. He was placed in fetters, wore an iron collar about his neck, and was meagerly fed, as all slaves are, in prevention of uprising against his captors. He was moved from Constantinople to a distant part of Russia, where he managed to kill his captor and escape. He managed to make his way back to England on or before 1604. By 1604, the Dutch arrived in New York, or as they called it then, New Amsterdam, or New Netherlands. They began establishing settlements there and up and down the East Coast, from the base of Nova Scotia to the tip of Virginia. The names Manhattan, the Bronx, and various other names are all derived from the Dutch. By 1619, the Dutch brought over 20 Africans as slaves and thus started a slave history in the New World. Incidentally, in honor of the Duke of York, who became King James II of England, the Dutch chose to relinquish their interest in the New Amsterdam, New Netherlands to the British Crown, in exchange for the control of the tropical Caribbean isle, Suriname, Dutch Guyana, the Spice Island, rich in nutmeg, tobacco, sugarcane, and more. New Amsterdam was then renamed New York. In 1620, Pilgrims and Puritans, Quakers arrived for the religious freedom with the aid of Captain Miles Standish, utilizing Captain Smith's maps and navigations for the route to northern Virginia, and landed upon lands north of Virginia and named it New England. Captain John Smith was forbidden upon this voyage. The English crown, now having a solid hold upon the East Coast tract of land, especially around Jamestown, Virginia, decided to divide it up against the royals, and with those at court as follow. 1632, Baltimore, Maryland. City and harbor after 2nd Lord Baltimore Cecil Calvert, member of the Irish House of Lords. By 1729, it was a major port town. 1634, Henrico County, Virginia. Henricus was named after Henry Frederick, Prince of Wales. 1650, Montgomery County, Maryland. George Calvert I, Baron Baltimore. Land was granted to the Calvert family by King Charles I of England. Anne Arundel County, Maryland, named after Lady Anne Arundel. 1653, Alexandria, Virginia. Stafford County, Virginia. Arlington, Virginia. Prince William County, Virginia. Fairfax County, Virginia. All House of Burgesses. Westmoreland County, Virginia. House of Burgesses, birthplace of President George Washington. The Washington family are direct kinfolk to the Spencer family, then and present, all connected by the way of King Henry VIII of the Tudors throne. Princess Lady Diana Spencer, deceased, was married to Prince Charles Philip Arthur George, son of Queen Elizabeth II, current queen. Prince Charles and Princess Lady Diana's son, Prince William, is the present heir to the British crown, currently held by the longest holder of the throne, Queen Elizabeth II. Incidentally, Princess Lady Diana's brother, Charles Edward Maurice Spencer, is currently the 9th heir to the throne. 1658, Calvert County, Maryland. Charles Calvert, 3rd Baron Baltimore. Charles County, Maryland. Charles Calvert, 3rd Baron of Baltimore. 1659, Baltimore County, Maryland, after Lord Baltimore. 1661, Talbot County, Maryland, named after Lady Grace Talbot. 1666, Somerset, Maryland, named after Lady Mary Somerset. 1669, Dorchester, Maryland, named after Earl of Doris, direct friends to the Calvert and kinfolks to Lord Baltimore. 1674, Cecil County, Maryland, named after Lord Baltimore. 1696, Prince George's County, Maryland, created by the English Council of Maryland, portioned by both Calvert and Charles County. In creation, a portion of Prince George's will become the creation of Washington, D.C., the nation's capital. 1706, Queen Anne's County, Maryland, named after the reigning Queen of Britain. 1742, Worcester County, Maryland, after the Earl of Worcester. Suffolk County, Virginia, of House of Burgesses, named after the royal governor in the Suffolk, England, William Gooch. 1752, Towson, Maryland, named after both brothers William and Thomas Towson in association with Lord Baltimore. 1759, Fauquier County, Virginia, named after the 4th Earl of Loudon Hill, England, Francis Fauquier. Many other counties and townships were begot from the Crown of England in the vicinity of Jamestown, Virginia. Interestingly enough, in 1791, a portion of Prince George's County, Maryland, also a portion of Montgomery County, Maryland, as well as a portion of land from the property delineated to the House of Burgesses, a portion of both Alexandria, Virginia, and Arlington, Virginia, were deemed for the construction of Washington, D.C., to the prescribed nation's capital. This tract of land that's now rented by its donors is by far uninhabitable. Water from the Potomac River runs through tract of land in every direction. Some of these waters were extremely deep in depth, and other areas are swampy, shallow marshes. It is well understood by all that only an act of God could possibly make this donated land habitable and functional. Incidentally, in 1732, in Westmoreland County, Virginia, General and later President George Washington was born. His family is that of the first family Virginia of direct aristocracy of the British Crown. There is an expression that is so fitting for this very moment. No one knows hate more than family, and also those of the aristocracy. Young George Washington became engaged and highly irritated at the British Crown, with their cumbersome and complacent attitude, always expecting the colony's new world to forge over all its profits. The young George said these monies only aid England in yielding their tyranny upon other unsuspecting nations. The young General George Washington rose up against the British Crown and took with him a band of men that shared his ideology. Shortly thereafter, secession from the Mother of England began, followed by the Revolutionary War, thus yielding the 13 colonies and the formation of a new nation. Premise. The journey you are about to embark on is a singularly and very interesting pilgrimage. I select this particular noun, pilgrimage, for the reader to place himself in the position of the main character, Lil. Lil is a brilliant man of superior intellect. He would in present date be considered a Rhodes Scholar, a rocket scientist, and possibly even the head of a Mensa Society organization. His intelligence is phenomenal. However, this is the 1790s, and Lil is heavily conflicted for various reasons. He is President George Washington's right-hand man upon his estate in MountVernon, Alexandria, Virginia. Lil is George Washington's procurement officer for everything needed at the MountVernon plantation. Incidentally, Lil is George Washington's nephew, his brother's son. President George Washington relies on Lil for everything. Upon this inherited land, the president is busy handling the affairs of this new nation, the 13 colonies, therefore relies on his home front to be handled accordingly and with constant profits, monthly and annually. Lil successfully handles all this and more, thus provoking the president to utilize Lil's thriftiness, fortitude, charismaticness, and superior intellect in other areas for his personal gain, and for the embetterment of this growing nation, and it works. President George Washington recognizes the superior being that Lil possesses. Due to his amity, the president capitalizes from this association and mightily Be mindful, this is the 1790s. Slavery is prevalent in the colonies, and Lil Nero Washington is a quadroon who is passing as white. All is knowingly done under the complete guidance of President George Washington and George mentor Lord Brian Justin Fairfax. This story contains lots of travel throughout the United States, various countries in Europe, especially England, France, and Russia. And for all the purpose of President George Washington and his personal mission for the United States, all of this is performed for George by Nero, his passing quadroon nephew, who is highly educated and multilingual. The story itself contains heavy drama, moments of elated joy, some spirituality, some sexual proclivities, horror atrocities, lots of death, numerous births, and a family history of aristocracy's involvement both near and far. Without any further ado, I present you Lil's story from his personal memoir that was divinely released solely and singularly to this author. Enjoy. Feddors. The Potomac at Mount Vernon, a life of wealth, opulence, from chattel and apples. April 1791, sunrise. In a soft slumber, barely awakened, I lazily ascend from my bed to the low of a distant cock welcoming in the dawn. I thence hear the voice of Geo faintly calling for Miko, the estate shepherd boy. "Miko!" called Geo. "Yes, sir," replies Miko. "Take this note to Lil's," advised the caller. "Right away, sir," Miko says in return. I gently lay back down, collecting my thoughts, and mumble out a tranquil prayer as I start my day. Suddenly I hear the sound of footsteps running approaching my cottage. Along with those running steps, I hear the vibrations of an adherent stampede. The pace ends as I now hear the footsteps upon my wooden gallery and now hard knocks upon my door. I open the door and observe Miko, an 11-year-old mulatto boy, delivering me the note. Miko breathlessly spat out, "Morning, Mr. Lil. Master George gave me this here note to deliver to you." "Okay, Miko, thank you," I respond as I retrieve the note from his hand. "Yes, sir, okay. I'm a key on now, taking the sheet and gracing and feeding, sir. Good day, sir," he says. "Okay, Miko, good day to you too," I relent. "Thank you, sir." Then I retort, "Miko, wait." He stopped on the edge of the gallery looking at me, along with all 30 of the herd of sheep that follow him, all now grazing upon me as well. I stated, "Miko, I'm going to inform Geo that I wish for you to be in attendance to some classes that my sister Naya shall be tutoring to some of the selected vassals, such as yourself. She'll be instilling reading, writing, English, and math. I hope you'll be interested." Miko grinned from ear to ear and expressed, "Oh, yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir." I advised, "You will still be responsible for your duties in tending the sheep, but you will also have time for these classes, which will meet 3 days per week, 3 hours on each met day." He excited says, "Oh, sir, Jesus, let me know when I be there, so long as Marcy George agrees to, I sir." "Yes, of course, Miko, and he will," I advised. "Okay, bye again, son. Thank you, sir," he says. He walked off my gallery and gathered his flock of sheep. They walked down towards the river, where the sheep are to graze in the area of the great oak, which sits high on the hill's bend that greets the river. Interestingly, those sheep will only follow Miko. He doesn't even have a dog to assist to him. He talks and they follow his every word, wherever he goes. Funny, I remember when Miko was born. His mother's name is Nancy. She's about 31 years old, a darky. And she's a field hand, or as Jill calls them, vassals, instead of niggers or slaves. He's very kind, however, according to the main house kitchen chatter back when Nancy was pregnant with Miko, which came about unsurprising and quite scandalously, yet quite normal for a field hand. She was often seen by and with her field manager, a freed white Irishman who was previously an indentured servant named Samuel Thorne, who was now roughly 36 years old. Samuel arrived some 15 years prior to the estate at the age of 21. He was accompanied by his wife Susie, who was 20, and his young son Samuel Jr., 5. Samuel and his young family came over in chains under the guise of debtor's prison, as did most whites coming over from the old country. He, along with his family, together as one unit, were negotiated upon and purchased just as the slaves are. At the King Street docks in Alexandria, Virginia, he and his family were purchased for the sum of $200. Unlike the Negro slave that's chattel indefinitely, Samuel and his family were indentured servants with a chattel servitude contract of 5-year service. By this contract, they were provided the understanding never to return back to Ireland. All slaves and indentured servants alike at auction upon sales and prior to leaving the auction block must have life insurance purchased upon their heads prior to leaving with their owners. Samuel worked the fields and his young son too assisted. Susie, his wife, function was that of housekeeping at the main house. It was prearranged for Samuel upon the completion of his 5-year servitude. He will manage, oversee the darkies, chattel that he so works alongside with, and will be paid a modest salary. Well, while Samuel was an indentured servant working alongside the slaves, he once defended a female darky named Nancy, who was then only 14. The overseer at the time was an old white man named Luke, who was somewhat semi-mean, stupid, with red leathery skin that perpetually reeked of strong backwoods spirits. Luke would always leer upon the young Nancy. While sitting upon his horse, he would squint his red, bloodshot, drunken eyes at her, while watching her every move. He would even make kissing noises at her every time she would bend over while harvesting the field. He even stepped up his advances and began making lewd comment at her. You know I'ma get that stuff from you and you're gonna take it, you're gonna like it, you nigger wench cut, he said, and was heard saying, I could smell your hot funky cunt all the way from over here on my horse. Luke says to Nancy. Nancy would ignore him and keep on working. In hopeful anticipation, he would move along and observe some of the others. Then one day, that old crazy drunk jumped off his horse and landed on top of Nancy. She jumped up and ran, and Luke shouted, grabbed her. 2 other men, darkies, field slaves, complied and grabbed Nancy. They held her for the drunken old Luke to come upon her. Everyone in the field watched out of the corner of their eyes as old Luke stumbled upon to her and backhanded her. Nancy fell to the ground upon impact, and old Luke jumped on top of her while the 2 compliant field hand slaves snickered and laughed while bumping each other's elbow. In the midst of this would be violent folly. Suddenly, Samuel ran over and shoved both of the 2 goons' field hands that restrained her, and then Samuel kicked Luke in the head so hard that it instantly knocked him out cold. Samuel then grabbed Nancy, who was still clothed, and helped her to her feet. He asked, "Are you okay?" Her reply was, "I'm okay. He ain't getting nothing, and never is. Only my face stings." She gently caresses her cheek from whence being smacked. She brushed off any dirt that was upon her burlap sack clothing, and she readjusted her head dressing rag and resumed working. She frowned mercilessly at the 2 Negro coons that held her. About 30 minutes later, old Luke awoke, due only to his loyal steed, which is now splattering piss upon his face. He mounted his steed and 2 resumed working, but more so now on the other side of the field, away from both Nancy and Samuel. There were no other instances ever again of old Luke trying any form of hanky-panky with the field hands. Interestingly enough, Nancy began giving Samuel the thankful sweet eyes of lust. Samuel restrained himself and did all he could within his might to avoid her gazes upon him. Samuel respected his wife Susie, who now has been declining declining in health, and also because their son too worked the fields with him. Now, some 5 years later, Samuel is freed from his chattel servitude contract, and now he manages the same group he once labored alongside as a servant. Nancy is now 19 and still gives Samuel the heated eyes of lust, yet now Samuel is yielding due to Susie's sickly nature, which prevents her in performing her wifely duties, so Samuel would send his son to fetch water from the creek for the group. And in these same moments of his son's absence, he and Nancy would have daily moments of erotic bliss there in the field. Needless to say, Nancy was soon with child. Couldn't be happier. Unfortunately, within 1 month, Susie died of consumption. Nancy stepped right up to the plate, though she knows due to her race that she would never be his wife. She would be a loyal and trusted companion and would yield all fidelity and care to him. And several months later, Miko was welcomed into the world at the MountVernon estate. The note. Lil, come join me under the great oak tree at noon for lunch. Dress accordingly and bring a quill and pad for an immediate meeting thereafter. Geo. I then selected my clothing for the luncheon meeting and proceeded with my daily duties in running and handling all the business matters of the estate. I then called for my assistant, Timothy. Tim, 21, is the quadroon son of Lord Hamlin, one of Geo's closest confidants, and that of Anna, Martha's half-sister and chambermaid. Anna is a beautiful mulatto, roughly 40 years in age, and she was included in the dowry of slaves that all transferred over to Geo upon their marriage. The widowed Martha, now newly married to Geo, dowry consisted of the following: cash, stocks, and bonds valued at $100,000, a medium-sized chest filled with gold coins and bullions from the sunken vessel of Christopher Columbus's original discovery expedition that was excavated in the Caribbean seas along Hispaniola's coast, valued at $50,000, grand sum of 125 slaves, which included 10 mulattas and mulattoes, valued at $70,000, and personalized custom-made jewelry, valued at $15,000. Martha's dowry valued near the sum of $250,000, of which all reverted over to Geo upon their union. The law does not permit women to possess anything of value, or the state would confiscate their property unless married. Geo, who was already wealthy due to inheriting MountVernon and its grounds, along with the existing slave chattel, a sum of 75 slaves, Geo, now married to Martha, and all her possessions from her dowry, has a net worth value of $650,000. Geo is now one of the richest men in the new colonies, only next to the richest man in Americas, being his friend and mentor, Lord Brian Justin Fairfax, whose value creases the $2 million mark. Geo entrusts me personally with all his acquired wealth that exceeds $650,000 and 200 slave chattel for proper management. My duties consist of managing every aspect of the grounds here at MountVernon, excluding Geo's private island and the Potomac River off the shores of MountVernon. I hire all the staff to run the various entities and functions of the grounds, of which its dimensions are 2 miles in width from the Potomac River shoreline westward and 10 miles in length going south towards Richmond, Virginia. I have been managing all the grounds personally for the past 10 years, even prior to Geo's return as his heir, acquiring all the land and everything upon it. Geo and I have known each other since my birth. His brother Lawrence Augustine is my father, therefore Geo is my uncle. I was born here at MountVernon and reared along with my identical twin sister Naya. We were both very well privately educated here in my cottage, which then was our schoolhouse, by governess and governors, and well by private tutors, From age 5 we began school, which was 6 days a week, 5 hours daily. We were well versed in all subjects of mathematics, reading, writing, science, English, literature, and languages to fluent proficiency in French, German, Spanish, and Russian. We both excelled excellently in our studies, all in preparation for our duties here at Mount Vernon. My sister and I were the only pupils in our class. Father invested generously in our education. Often, our governess would go off into tangents in the midst of teaching us. She would advise us, "This family loves you both very well, and they're making such a grand investment in your lives. But it is all understood. They're investing in you because you're going to make them beaucoup of money in the very near future." My sister and I only thought that this was normal family life, and that schooling and education has taken precedence. No, it appears that governess could not obtain a tongue. Thus she released a lot of new information that yielded both my sister and I to be in complete dismay. Surprisingly, the governess acquired a mirror there in our schoolhouse and held it up to both my sister and I. She then expressed, "Look at yourselves very well." She then took the mirror away and asked both my sister and I, "Now look upon me and describe what your teacher looks like." As we both began describing her appearance, she jotted down on the large portable blackboard all we said: tall, slim, about 30 years old, blonde hair, white skin, blue eyes, clothing, and etc. Now she looked at us and began to describe us. My sister and I are identical. The only thing that differentiates us is our gender. At this particular time, we were both 8 years old when this occurred, and it was life-changing. My teacher always addressed me by my real name, Nero, though everyone else calls me Lil. It's short for Little Washington or Little Augustine because my father was Gio's older brother, Augustine, who died when we were very, very young. My teacher asked me to go to the blackboard to write down her descriptions of us. So I began writing. She blurts out, "Small, slim, but healthy, blonde, long, curly hair for me, and long, blonde, straight hair for Naya, hazel green eyes, well clad." Then she asked, "What's missing from our description of you both?" We looked at the board, and my sister and I both shouted out, "Color." "Okay," the teacher says, "Yes, color. Write your color down." I then wrote out the word white. My teacher thanked me and asked me to take my seat. She now looked at the board and advised, "Something is incorrect upon your description of each other." Both Naya and I didn't see anything wrong, but the teacher then erased the word white from our description and wrote the word Negro. My sister and I began to laugh, but my teacher now had a stern, unmoved face about her. My sister and I stopped laughing and asked, "Why did you write Negro?" The governess then walked over to the window, which had a view of the Potomac River, and she began to cry. My sister and I looked at one another in total bewilderment. We silently asked each other, should we help her? Then the teacher turns and looked at us. She advised, "You need to know some things about yourself. I'm sorry to say this, though the both of you look the way you do, and yes, you do resemble white people, yet I am sorry in informing you, but the both of you are Negroes." I advised, "This is impossible." My teacher then says, "Isn't your mother Goldie?" We both advised, "Yes." "Well, what color do you think your mother is?" She asked. We both said white. In unison, she says no. She is an emancipated Negro, a very fair mulatta. She then proceeded to advise, "Your grandmother was a negress, a black slave named Ruby Charles. She was impregnated by a white man, her master, Frank Epps, a captain in the army. Rumor has it that when Ruby was carrying your mother, Goldie, that it was a difficult pregnancy and also a tough delivery. Unfortunately, Ruby died from the pangs and travail upon birthing your mother into existence. Ruby was 16 at the time she had Goldie. She was always heard by the other slaves in the field saying, 'The moment this child is born, I'ma throw her in the river and save her from this life of wretchedness and misery.' But Ruby died upon delivery, thus Goldie lived." She continues, It was said that Godey was such a fair-complected infant that Captain Epps emancipated her. Upon the third day of her birth, Captain Epps had Godey reared by a wet nurse who lived upon the grounds in Suffolk County, Virginia. Upon the captain's death, his wife summons the lawyer to sell the estate, along with the chattel slaves, because she and women alike could not hold or possess property. Godey was at age 10 at this time when the captain passed. Captain Epps and the Washingtons of Mount Vernon were such good friends that he asked prior to dying if Godey could come and live on the estate here at Mount Vernon, and honor that she's a free woman, though she's a child still. The Washingtons quickly agreed to this favor, and they continued her education here at Mount Vernon as well. She continues, it was also noted from the moment Godey arrived here in Mount Vernon that she was informed to strip thought from her head that she's a mulatta. From now on, due to her facial color, she's to carry herself with an air of passing as a white. She was advised to never associate with any of the darkies or any of the slaves anywhere. She is to be in complete denial of her past identity for her safety. She is to never leave the grounds of Mount Vernon, though she's free. But this was too for her safety. But our mother is white, and so are we, I say to the governess. Our father is the late Augustine Washington. Yes, advised our teacher. Yes, your father is white, Augustine Washington, but I beg to differ that your mother is white. She is mulatta, and because your father is a white man, that makes you both quadroons, which is 3/4 white blood, which means you both technically are supposed to be slaves. But your mother was emancipated. The teacher continued, your poor grandfather, I can only tell you of what I've heard, but it makes so much sense. It was said that Ruby, though was young, she had a strong and feisty personality. None of the other slaves bothered her because she was considered taboo. She was flogged daily, some 20 lashes by the overseer. She ran away twice from the captain's estate in Suffolk County, only to be caught, returned, beaten, and branded in R, burnt upon her face. R meaning runaway. She mustered the strength again some 2 months later and attempted to escape with another slave, Henry, from the same estate. They were both captured in Baltimore, Maryland, intercepted in their attempts to reach Canada. Upon their return to the estate, Ruby had her left ear cut off, and she was flogged 50 lashes, and the 3-pronged iron collar was clad upon her neck. Her accomplice Henry got it bad too, even worse. This was Henry's first time escaping because he was older and not problematic. The overseer wanted to make a public show of Henry's punishment. He was hoisted up on a tree branch by his wrists being tied together. He stood upon the tips of his toes, and he was left there in the hot sun all day prior to sunset. He was stripped naked and flogged 100 lashes, which tore open his skin horribly. He was then cat's clawed 20 times, and he finally was laid upon the ground. While upon the ground, he had all his extremities stretched out and pegged to the surface, as another slave now laid hot burning embers upon his raw open wound back. It was advised that he scream halfway through the night the next morning. The overseer had all the slaves, including Ruby, gather around and observe Henry's lowly condition. Henry was now dead. It was then advised later that day when the owner came around, the overseer informed him of Henry's death. The owner was overheard saying, well, he costs $50. I got 6 years of work out of him, and my life insurance on him will cash me out $100, so no lose to me, except a hard-head nigger runaway. My sister and I looked at our teacher astoundingly and in horror. The teacher then apologized for exposing such truths. She then said with tears in her eyes, being a Christian woman and moving around from various estates and plantations, I am more and more horrified at these Christian people who claim to love God. Yet they can treat their fellow humans, though they are a different color, as wretched, horrible, miserable animals. May God have mercy upon the souls of those poor slaves that have perished or have been harmed by these horrible white people that proclaim to know God's love. I'm so mortified and ashamed to be white. We then advise our teacher, if all this is true that has been expressed, we've never seen any of this here on this estate. She advised, and you won't. The Washingtons are good. They are by far the best family I have ever been employed under. But what happens when he dies? Mr. Washington's estate, along with all his property, might be sold if there's no adult male heir, and he has no children of his own, and he can't will it to you, Nero. Though you're free, you're a quadroon of Negro descent. Negroes and white women can't own property. She then says, take advantage of this great education and acquire as much knowledge as you can and experience. And when the time comes and Mr. Washington passes and the property is not willed over to the male heir, you and your sister, and if you ever have children, move immediately to Canada. Go somewhere where you will always be respected as free people and you can start a new life and a career there, utilizing all this great education. Her words then hit me like a fallen tree in the forest. It was difficult for us to resume our studies, but we did and finished out our day. When we concluded the day, the coach arrived, as always around 6, dusk, to take us to our mother's cottage, which is roughly 3 miles down upon the grounds. Our mother Goldie is a sweet, wonderful lady. She tends to us well, and she cooks our food and prepares our clothes for our schooling. She tends to our small farm behind the cottage, and she raises chickens too. Our provisions are provided us from the main house. But mother likes having extra, so she farms lightly. When we returned home that evening, my sister and I confronted our mother so she could expel all of our teacher's assertions. Surprisingly, mother's face dropped upon hearing all that was made known to us, and sadly she concurred and validated each comment. But mother said we are free. We are to always act as if we are passing as white. So don't worry yourselves. From that moment on, I understood, and the three of us made a pact. We promised never ever to mention this to anyone, and from here on, we are to remain acting as if we are the white folks. For our continued freedom and safety, we are passing. I snapped out of my long trance and resumed my duties prior to the luncheon with Geo. I called for Timothy. He resides in a small cottage that has a barn attached, which houses both of our horses. Therein, that we may patrol the grounds freely and easily. Unlike me, Timothy knows he is a slave, chattel property. Martha Washington never freed his mother, thus causing him to still be counted as a vassal, slave chattel. Geo had me take Timothy in under my wing to teach him to do all I do, because Geo has higher plans for me. Timothy's cottage is 100 yards away from mine. Daily in the morning we'll meet and go over all the itinerary for the day. At 6:30 a.m., daybreak, he arrives upon his horse and brings him the daily newspaper, the Examiner. I read the newspaper first, encircling articles that may be of interest to Geo. I then take the newspaper to Geo and leave it upon his desk for later viewing. Timothy always acquires this paper early at the nearby merchant store, where the estate has an established account. Interestingly, everyone knows Timothy is a quadroon slave, though he has limited range of free mobility within the area. No one bothers him because he too looks as passing, yet he's owned property by Geo. In our daily meetings, Timothy gives a rundown upon the day-to-day operations and tasks at hand of all the 20 miles that encompasses the estate. I take detailed notes and record all necessary information into my daily ledger of expenses and also into my daily journal of MountVernon to always have readily available for Geo's viewing. Timothy goes sections by section with me and gives complete detailed instructions of the 190 slaves and 18 managers, overseers, Irish and German indentured servants, recently freed, that he supervises. The main house are 10 chambermaids, all slaves, and 1 butler, a freed Welsh indentured servant that worked off his debt upon the estate. Daily at 7 a.m., my sister arrives in a coach with breakfast for both myself and Timothy. She is coached over from her dwellings by Gary, a 15-year-old dark-skinned slave boy. Timothy has this all arranged daily for us. Our lunch and dinner is also carted over in the same manner. The butler in the main house is Lawrence, and he reports directly to me all the dealings of the house, upcoming events, and etc. Every single person upon the estate, whether in the form of servitude or an employed personnel, has been personally selected by me, and they are all aware that though they don't see me much, that I see them, and know what each individual is doing. Therefore, do your due diligence, or there are consequences. It is important that I keep the staff in fear and with respect towards me, because they are all accountable to me, and I am accountable to Geo. And often when I meet with Geo, I must give him a thorough, concise, and very detailed report of all goings at the estate, all expenses, and all of the monies acquired. Timothy is of incredible talent and a great asset here upon the estate. He's a miniature me. I have educated him since the age of 13 and have trained him well. That now he is my complete protege, with the exception of languages. I have complete and total confidence in him. That if I ever in my absence, he is totally capable in handling this whole scenario. We concluded our meeting at 8:30. Timothy went about his daily duties, personally going to all sections of the estate for inspection, inventory, and to meet with each section manager for their daily report, and for him to give him their instructions to be carried out. I worked on my books for some time that morning and tallied all expenses, gains, and profits in preparations for inspection by Geo. It is now 11 a.m. and I washed and began to dress for our luncheon meeting. I attired myself in cream-colored Noble's men's clothing of the day. In addition, I clad myself with my white powdered wig that Geo often insists we wear in his presence. I begin my walk over with all ledgers and journals, my quill and pad, to the grad oak tree. I noticed Geo was early today and was already seated by the boulder. He had already been served some port wine that he'd begun sipping while awaiting my arrival. Upon my arrival to the table, the butler escorts me first to salute Geo. Geo stands, smiles, and gestures for me to be seated. The butler now pulls the chair away from the dressed linen table that's adorned with fine china, crystal goblets, and silver flatware. I placed the books, ledgers, and journals on a distant corner of the table for later viewing. Geo and I gave each other warm greetings and casually spoke of the splendid weather. We did all this, and we both gazed from the hilltop from where we sat, looking upon the Potomac River as we awaited our lunch to be served. The luncheon meeting. Geo complimented me for looking quite dapper and said that I fit the image of a true cavalier. I was very well flattered and returned the favor by ingratiating him and saying, "I've learned well, only by observing you, my dear friend." He smiled and nodded his head, and we commenced consuming the delicacies that were presented before us. As we consumed our vitals, we stared over the Potomac and observed all the river boats, cruise liners, and personal vessels as they scudded in fro their destinations. After lunch, the butler served us pecan a la mode with coffee and a snifter of brandy. There were cigars already placed upon the table for our leisure. After lunch, Geo went directly into our meetings. Our luncheon meeting was private, so being said, it was just the two of us. We have the liberty to go into detail if explanations are needed on any expense. Geo grabbed the books, ledgers, and journals from the corner of the table. He opened to the previous months, reads the bottom line figures of gains, and then turned to the current month and read it from the bottom line. As usual, he sees a profit and smiles. Geo then advises me, "Lil, I don't question your talent. This is a match only made in heaven." He also states, "Lil, I have boundless attachment to you. I entrust all my grounds to be at your command, and you've never failed me. Thank you." Then Geo went into reason for this meeting and by advising the following. "Lil, I'm about to make you a very rich man. By this time next week, you will board Lord Fairfax's private ship from right here at MountVernon, and you are going to represent me in Europe. You will be gone more or less 8 weeks, so Timothy will take over all your responsibilities in your absence. You'll sail over to England, France, and Russia, accompanied by Lord Fairfax himself. I have your travel papers here, signed and ready, with the aristocracy in all 3 jurisdictions. I will stop at nothing short of a wanton avarice, until I am well recognized amongst the gentries of each port of contact. You are to promote me, my family's name, and our familial association with the aristocracies, by way of the Spencer family of England. The Washingtons and the Spencer family has had a long legacy of association and connection to the British throne for centuries. My Washington blood been recorded history dating back from the Tudors' crown of King Henry VIII, and now in the golden age of King George III. Both Samuel Adams and the late Benjamin Franklin has started a great conquest in reestablishing this association with me. When the present crown sees you personally, Lil, they will like you. They'll be wooed over your appearance alone. Lil, you are aware that you're a beautiful man. Everyone and anyone that gazes upon you knows this. You shall be also fawned over by your incredible intelligence, your fidelity, ambassadorship. They will parade you around court at all their ostentatious galas, as hosts at dinners and receptions with dignitaries and their private meetings held only for the upper echelon at court. I want you to attend all events, Lil. You are there to promote me and all good things I am doing. This is a formal thank you to the listeners and the readers for taking part in enjoying in this free demo of the novel and sonic voyage, The Potomac at Mount Vernon, by Isznen, Feddors. Originally written in 2016. Full audio by Atlantic Coast Media. You can find the physical copy of The Potomac at Mount Vernon anywhere books are sold online and at select libraries near you. Full audiobook will be available soon. Cheers.